We've been working on a story about the Pac-12's negotiations with ESPN, and we had heard that they're over $100 million apart, and we were told yesterday evening that they were far more than $100 million apart. In fact, that they are 50% apart on what the Pac-12 wants versus what ESPN is offering. In fact, sources in the TV industry tell us that ESPN is not willing to go beyond their original offer of $800 million over 5 years. That's total over 5 years. Meanwhile, the Pac-12 is asking for a minimum of $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion. Jake, and these sources have been right all along. If in fact this is where we are, I don't see any way the Pac-12 survives this.
Yeah, I just, I don't know where the Pac-12 gets off thinking that they can command over $1 billion for a distribution deal. I think that, as I've been saying all along when we talk about this conversation and this situation, I often feel like the Pac-12 just thinks that it can command whatever the hell it feels like commanding, and that's not how business works. Like, whether we're talking about college football or Nancy's Bake Shop, you can't just do whatever you want. You're not just worth whatever you think you're worth. It's all about what someone's willing to pay you, and I think that what is beyond me is that the Pac-12 seemingly doesn't realize that it's on its deathbed. The Pac-12 doesn't realize that this conference is in real, tangible danger of dying.
Yeah.
And they're negotiating like, yeah, we'll be fine. Well, we'll be fine. It's fine. We don't need ESPN. Like, our price is our price, and it really just doesn't matter. And I think that, to me, there has to be at some point a day that comes along where George Kliavkoff and the people running the Pac-12 realize, hey, yeah, we're in serious trouble here. Like, we do need to take $800 million as opposed to $1.5 billion. So to me, that's what always stands out. If I'm ESPN, I don't move at all. I stick at my price. I stick at my offer. And if they don't like it, then it is what it is. And I don't know why ESPN would have any flexibility in that. I just don't.
Well, and this goes back to George Kliavkoff piping off, on the Wilner Canzano podcast in that hit piece on UCLA, where he talked about how he's guaranteeing nobody's leaving, and he's guaranteeing that the Big 12 isn't going to get Pac-12 members. And I think the bravado, the arrogance, the lack of understanding of who George Kliavkoff's conference is and where they are is really damaging the conference right now. Because if you, let's say in best case scenario for the Pac-12, that you stick and stay with ESPN, that's $16 million per school per year. And that's not a workable number.
Are we clear on that?
It just is not. I mean, it's $16 million. Nobody's going to sign that grant of rights.
Yeah.
And
that's the other conversation.
Yeah.
Like, the school's even accepting what you bring to the table. And so it's that's why it's just unbelievable to me that there has to be more at play if I'm George Kliavkoff in the Pac-12 than just the ESPN opportunity. I mean, we've heard all about how, the Amazons of the world might be interested, or digital streaming, platforms might be interested, Amazon, Apple, the Hulus, there's obviously a ton of people or companies in that space. And I just think that at some point you have to make the right decision as far as your distribution deal is concerned. You're at $16 million a year per school. Like, do you...
That's not
it's
viable.
Just embarrassing. It's not viable. It doesn't work. Like, it's not an option.
But again, I want to play this George Kliavkoff bite where he talked about the back of the envelope, because listen to what he says about UCLA's plight, and listen to what he says about UCLA joining the Big Ten.
Back of the envelope calculations on the negative impact on UCLA expenses, travel expenses, and just expenses for coaches' salaries and other things, just to get to the average Big Ten athletic budget. And, we think that the incremental money they're going to receive from the Big Ten media rights deal will be more than 100% offset by additional expenses. So you end up taking that money that you earn, and it goes to airline and charter companies and coaches and administrators. It doesn't go to supporting the student athletes.
Well, that's all well and good. And hey, look, it may be more expensive to travel, but here's the reality of the situation. It's $16 million a season, which is what the Pac-12 is looking at with ESPN's latest offer, according to sources. And that's the maximum. ESPN has told the Pac-12, this is where we are, and we're not going over this number, because I think ESPN realizes the Pac-12 has no leverage here.
Yeah.
And the Pac-12 is in real danger of going away, because the other thing that you have to remember is the Big 12 has been very quiet. And a lot of people are wondering, well, what is the new commissioner of the Big 12 doing? Why have we not gotten TV negotiation updates? Because according to those same TV industry sources, the Big 12 is just slow playing their TV negotiations, because what hurry are they in when the Pac-12 has zero leverage? And the other side of this story is, what is the Big Ten doing? Because according to other sources, we're told that the Big Ten has handshake agreements with schools in the Pac-12.
Is this the dagger?
And that Apple TV has real interest in picking up third-tier rights for the Big Ten. And the Big Ten, I think, would like to do that deal with Amazon, but I think Amazon has a lot of other opportunities that are a lot more cost-effective. If Apple TV swoops in and takes those rights for whatever figure the Big Ten is willing to take on those, I think that absolutely seals the deal on the Pac-12. It's over, because at that point, you're not just getting USC and UCLA. What that allows the Big Ten to do is to go to Cal and Stanford, Washington and Oregon, and say, hey, join our conference, be the West Coast division of the Big Ten, have travel partners, lessen the impact on your student athletes, lessen the impact on your bottom line. And by the way, when we add Apple TV or Amazon's money, that puts now every member of the Big Ten at $100 million
You guys ever want to kick it? We'll flow.
per season per school. That's game-changing, life-changing money for schools like UCLA, who have an incredibly huge hole to dig out of financially. And right now, I look at a school like Cal, who has huge debt on their stadium, who is not one on the field, who is not selling tickets, who's not selling merch. That's a huge windfall for a school that has no other opportunity to get to that windfall. And the other thing I would point to you is, what has the UC System Board of Regents done here? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
They have not made a ruling. They have not made a decision. And they haven't done that because they know what is financially viable is anything but the Pac-12. And it is far more viable for UCLA and UC Berkeley, Cal, to join the Big Ten. So to me, all of this adds up to say the Pac-12 is lying in its deathbed right now. It is on its deathbed, and George Kliavkoff is absolutely the grim reaper of this conference. And that interview he did with Canzano and Wilner is coming back to bite him square on his ass right now, because, Jake, he can't back up what he said in that interview.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I think that George is again, a guy that wants to play the PR cycle. And I think that, this concept of the Big Ten essentially just sitting here like a vulture waiting for you to, fall over dead as far as your conference is concerned, and then just swoop in and take everything is real. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Because think about it. Whether we're talking about ESPN, the Big 12, the Big 10, none of these people in this situation outside of the conference itself have to move on this. There's no, the Big 10 is going to get paid either way. The Big 10 is already in an incredibly strong position. They're at a point where they're talking about third-tier rights at this point. That's how good of a position the Big Ten is in. So there's just no incentive for them to rush. They can wait you out. They can wait for you to die in your pride, because that's what I feel like is happening. George Kliavkoff and that leadership team are very prideful about where the conference is at. They have no ability to say, yeah, you know what? Yeah, we were wrong. We overvalued our conference, and it's not to say the conference sucks, but with where we are right now, this is what we have to do, X, Y, and Z. If George were to come out and say that today, I think that would completely change the landscape of this entire conversation, because then that shows people, yeah, he gets it. He understands. Now there's opportunity for partnerships, and maybe the Pac-12 can exist, but they need to partner with another conference, and maybe those two teams come together. I don't know, but my point just is that not only is $16 million an embarrassing number just when you compare it to other conferences, no school is going to sign that. And there's just not a path forward. That's the problem. There's not an obvious path forward. And even if that path was difficult, but if you did that thing, you'd be able to move forward. That doesn't even exist. So that's why, to us on the show, it looks like the PAC is dying. The PAC is running out of time. And I don't know. If you're Oregon, why would you stay in the PAC? If you're any of these big time schools,
that's a great question.
Why would you?
What is the incentive to be here? I just think with the Big Ten, it's a matter of when they get a digital stream deal done. When that happens, I just don't see why they would stand still anymore. And I think the Pac-12 is well aware. One of the things when we talk about this, we've wondered for months and months why George Kliavkoff was being so brash and having so much bravado. And I think when you have no other avenue to take, you simply just lie. And I think that's what, in my opinion, George Kliavkoff has done here.
Yes.
When he says, I guarantee no team in this conference is leaving for the Big 12.
Congratulations, but that's bullshit.
How can it be anything other than that?
Yeah.
And I think the damage that is done to this conference, and frankly, the damage that was done by Larry Scott to this conference, the injuries that he caused,
yes,
are remarkable. And maybe the Pac-12 should call the advocates.
If you've been injured in a car accident, even if it wasn't your fault, you still have to deal with the consequences, like overdue medical bills, car repairs, and worse, insurance companies that try their hardest not to pay their fair share. No need to worry, though. The advocates are here to help.
Otherwise known as the Big Ten.
See, they were... he did injure. You injured, damaged.
I'm for real.
You need a lawyer to,
I'm for real.
The Monty Show presented by the Advocates. UtahAdvocates.com. Come on, that was pretty good.
Off to a raging start.
Pretty good. A straight right, you might. But no, seriously, the thing that is really important when you're in an accident, insurance companies are not on your side. Your insurance, their insurance, neither one is doing what's best for you. They're doing what's best for them. That's why you need an advocate. Get to UtahAdvocates.com. Talking about the breaking news this morning that the Pac-12 is teetering on the verge of destruction, frankly, because ESPN is unwilling to go past the $800 million mark over a 5-year period on TV rights for the Pac-12. Yeah. And really, at that point, you're talking about the Pac-10. The other interesting part of this is that ESPN is unwilling to budge. They want a termination clause, a termination trigger, if you will, that if the conference shrinks during their TV contract with the Pac-12, that they have the right to immediately terminate that deal. And the Pac-12 is saying, we're not going to do that. And I think it's smart negotiating. ESPN is the worldwide leader in sports for a reason. They understand their leverage here. The Pac-12 needs ESPN. ESPN does not need the Pac-12 because, again, much like the Big 12, and this is why I say, this is why I say that you have to understand the tact and the path that the Pac-12 has taken here versus the path and the tact that the Big 12 has taken. And Jake, I think the Big 12 has handled this masterfully.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Big 12 understands who they are and in the position that they are in. And that position, to me, is one of sort of cleaning up whatever the Big 10 doesn't pick up, which sounds bad, right? It sounds like, they're just getting seconds, basically. But to me, I actually think for the Big 12, it's a great position to be in because what you've done here is you said, okay, we're adding BYU and a couple other schools here next year, and then we're gonna wait and see how this Pac-10 situation sort of plays out. And we know that Kevin Warren and the Big Ten are taking on USC and UCLA, and likely going to take on Oregon and a couple other schools in the Pac.
I think it's no doubt that it's Oregon and Washington, Cal and Stanford, to add to USC and UCLA.
So if you're sitting there in the Big 12 and you're watching this and you're in the know and you have the information, there's no incentive to make any brash movement. You need to wait for this to play out
Yeah.
and have some conversations again. And I always bring this up, but this is where Utah fans should be, perking up a little bit, because this is Utah's route out of the conference and into a better situation. So to me, if I'm the Big 12, yeah, I think I've handled this really well so far. I think I want to have conversations with, San Diego State, Utah, all the usual suspects that we talk about going to the Big 12, and have everything kind of lined out. And then once the Big 10 finishes, I'm going to swoop in and do what I do.
See, I think when you talk about the Big 12 expanding, Brett Yormark has handled this masterfully. He did that tour of the conference. The news came out that the Big 12 is opening negotiations early with its TV partners, Fox and ESPN.
Right.
And that's all you've heard, right? ESPN said, well, we're not negotiating early yet. And you haven't really heard anything since then, because what I'm told has happened is the Big 12 has simply slow played that, and they've gotten all of their ducks in a row, and they've built relationships. I don't think there's any doubt that the Arizona schools, Colorado, and Utah are the first four into the Big 12.
Hey, guys.
And the more interesting angle here, and by the way, we'll get to BYU and Utah State in 3 minutes on Football at 50 presented by Papa Murphy's Pizza. But I think the more interesting angle here is what's going to happen with the Mountain West in San Diego State. Because I think San Diego State, from what I understand, has really rebuffed any invitation talk to the Big 12. And I think they've done that because they believe that the Mountain West is going to be in a better position once all this shakes out. Because what are the two schools in the Pac-12 that we haven't heard anything about? Oregon State and Washington State. And all of a sudden, if you add Oregon State and Washington State, you have significantly grown your footprint in the Mountain West. And one of the things I think is so interesting, when we talked about Craig Thompson stepping down as the commissioner of the Mountain West, what did I tell you then? The same thing I'm going to tell you now. Here's when the Mountain West grows. I don't think the Mountain West is going away. I think the Mountain West has a real home. Like all these people that talk about Boise State should be added to the Big 12. Absolutely not. The Boise State, with all due respect, is not the same program it was under Chris Peterson and has not been since.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at Boise State and you look at San Diego State, those become better football programs with the addition of Oregon State and Washington State. And I think you don't have to let the Apple Cup go away. You don't have to let, the Holy War go away. These moves do not necessarily damage the regional rivalries. I think they actually enhance them. And I think when you look at where Boise is, I think Boise and Washington State is a natural rivalry. Territorially speaking, Pullman and Boise are not that far apart.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at Washington State and, Washington, Oregon and Oregon State, Utah and BYU, I don't think those games have to go away. It's certainly for BYU and Utah. If you add Utah to the Big 12, which I think, again, since day one I've told you, I think that is absolutely done. I think Utah is joining the Big 12. I think it's the only move forward for them.
I just think it makes sense.
But it's never made sense that Utah would join the Big 10.
Yeah.
It has never made sense. And this is also another Kliavkoff talking point that the Big 12 and the Pac-12 will never merge. I think one of the things that comment did is it damaged his ability to negotiate with ESPN, because I don't think there's any doubt that the point of authority for ESPN would be getting the Big 12 and the Pac-12 to merge.
Yeah.
Bringing those two conferences together puts ESPN in a position of strength, because ESPN has current rights deals with both of them, and it would be natural and easy for ESPN to take on those rights. But now Brett Yormark has puffed his chest out and said, hey, we're going into the West Coast footprint. And you have George Kliavkoff puffing his chest out saying, no team in my conference is going to the Big 12. It makes perfect sense for the corner schools to join the Big 12